Sunbury Motors, 4th Street in Sunbury. Sunbury Motors Kia, routes 11 and 15 in Hummel's Wharf, and online at sunburymotors.com. And we are joined by the outstanding Rich Scarcella. Rich, it was a pleasure to see you on Saturday. Great to have you with us today.
Steve, always a pleasure for me to be with you.
Especially on a day where the Packers are playing.
Yeah, and I just got even better news. The Packers-Viking game on Sunday has been flexed to a 4:25 Eastern time, which is suitable for us to get work done before the kickoff.
Oh, well done. I love that. That's great. Saturday. I just wanted to start with the atmosphere part of it. It's a little different because we have the windows open and the whole thing, as opposed to a closed press box. But what was at least your general impression of the atmosphere? Rich? I think we may have lost Rich. Okay.
I believe you're right. I will get on that.
Well, thank you very much, Todd. All right, so we'll get back to Rich Scarcella in just a few moments and talk with him about what he saw and everything that went with it on Saturday at Beaver Stadium. So, as Penn State beat SMU in the college football playoff opener 38-10. And just really, the defense set the tone to create a dominating performance by Penn State. And that's really what it ended up being. As I said, when I saw like 3 or 4 of the SMU players come out without shirts on, I looked over at Jack. I said, false bravado. Because that's what it is to me all the time. It's false bravado every time I see something like that. Because... who are you trying to convince, me or you? I grew up in New England.
Should be back, sir.
I wear a coat. Rich, your thoughts on the atmosphere from your perspective on Saturday in Beaver Stadium?
Electric. We had heard, looking at Ticketmaster in the week or so leading up to the game, there were a lot of tickets available, and with the weather, real field 9 or 10 degrees at kickoff, didn't know really what to expect. I thought the turnout was magnificent. I thought the atmosphere was electric, and I think the crowd had a definite impact on SMU.
Yeah, I do too. I also feel there's a fine line between reckless and aggressive, and in watching the videos leading in, I felt that SMU skirted it. Was that in evidence on Saturday?
SMU skirted how they approached the crowd, or
no, in terms of how they play the game. I mean, there's between reckless and aggressive. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I thought it was aggressive right from the get-go, from the first series when they on the 4th and 1 where they ran the bootleg, and Jennings just didn't throw a good pass to the tight end. He threw it to the wrong side, even though he was open. So yeah, I think they were aggressive for the most part. The one call that I still don't understand is kicking a field goal down 28-0 in the third quarter.
Sense.
I didn't get that at all.
That made no sense. All right. And I know, and this tells you everything about the conditions, though. Rogers is 15 of 21 beyond 40 yards with 7 50-yard field goals this season. Mm-hmm. That was a 42-yarder. Rich, he was short. It wasn't even close.
Yeah, it was. I'm even going back to the first one.
Yeah.
That down 28-0.
Yeah, that made no sense.
I don't understand. I don't make no. I mean, it makes no sense. And then you're right, Steve. On top of it are the weather conditions. What are you doing? And are you playing to win, or you're playing to have a respectable score at the end? I didn't get that at all.
No, it made no sense to me. The Penn State defense, to get 3 picks, 2 pick sixes, especially in the first half, from start to finish, what did you think of their performance?
I think it was outstanding. They were gap sound, meaning they played a very disciplined defense. They stayed in their lanes, and they dominated. I mean, that team was scoring 38 points a game and held them to 10, which is their season low. I wasn't surprised that Penn State's defense would have a big impact. SMU had only played one top 35 defense all year, and that was BYU, and BYU held them to 13 points. So that didn't surprise me, but they dominated. I thought all three linebackers played great. I thought the defensive line was wonderful, and the secondary wasn't tested much.
The running game. Jack and I talk about this all the time on our broadcast, that regardless of location of game, regardless of weather conditions, defense and your running game travel. Singleton had 97 yards from scrimmage. Allen had 98 yards from scrimmage. What was your thoughts on their performance in conjunction with the offensive line?
I was going to say, let me talk about the offensive line first. Not that I don't think highly of Nick or K-Tron. I think they're both great backs. I think the offensive line, these last two games, Saturday and then in the Big Ten title game against Oregon, were outstanding. The offensive linemen were outstanding, and to run for almost 300 yards against Oregon, which had a top 10 defense, has a top 10 defense, and to run for almost 200 yards against the fourth-ranked rushing defense in the country in back-to-back games, that tells me a lot. It says a lot about them. Yes, I agree with your premise and Jack's premise. I think defense and running game, very important in this playoff. And if you look at all four games last weekend, the line of scrimmage, the teams that won the line of scrimmage, or actually the teams that won the game, dominated the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Somebody had asked me if I would make any change in the format that they have. I said the only change I would make is that, look, the NCAA tournament, for example, if you win the Big Ten championship game, it doesn't mean you're one of the top four seeds. You know, you could end up on the 3-seed line, right, winning the Big Ten championship game. Because I think you have to use some basketball logic as to how it fits into football logic, right? I think you have to. I think they should seed them, Rich, 1 through 12, while giving the champions an automatic bid, but that doesn't mean you're one of the top four seeds. It means you could be seeded 7th.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's the tweak that I would make, because I'll give you an example. Down here in Berks County in high schools, there are 8 teams that make the basketball playoffs and other sports. And they had a system in place when they went to 3 divisions that the top 3, the 3 division champions not only get automatic berths, they got the top 3 seeds. And what was happening, the 4-5 game were 2 of the better teams in the league, and they were beating each other up. I think absolutely they should be seeded 1 through 12. I want to keep the automatic berth like you. Yes. I want to keep it for the conference champions. The only question I have is, besides the Power 4, do you leave one group of 5 team in? Like, how does that work? How will that work? But I think if it's 12, I think you can't have more than one group of 5, whatever. Whatever. Mountain West, any of the other conferences. So yeah, I think you get a better. Maybe you get better matchups in the first round. I don't know, but I think that's a much more fair way to do it.
Yeah, again, that doesn't mean I agree with Rich completely. Just because we're talking about, hey, you go 1 through 12, Ohio State plays Tennessee in an 8-9 game. Everybody thought that game was going to go to the fourth quarter. And Ohio State, as Rich said, dominated the offensive line in what was supposed to be, quote, the most competitive game of the weekend. So, whatever system it is, you're still going to get games like that. But I'd rather see that system than, with all due respect, Arizona State. You're telling me Arizona State's the 4 seed? Really?
Yeah, you can't. Like, if you are Oregon,
yep.
You're playing Ohio State. Texas is playing Arizona State.
Right.
That's an issue. Now, maybe, and again, having not sat in the meetings, the compromise they reached out to get it passed, I don't know. But I'm with you, 1 through 12. See them run 1 through 12, regardless if they're conference champions or not.
What does it mean? The next game is going to be the next game. And it's a business trip. You're not doing steak fries, and you're not going to be going out and visiting all the sites and things like that. This is all business. They're not even getting there till Saturday night. So, Rich, what did it mean, big picture, that Penn State got in and won the first game? And then I'll go with a couple of the questions after.
Steve, I wrote today in the print editions. I felt there was enormous pressure on Penn State and James Franklin to win that game. I thought the relief was visible. You could hear the emotion in his voice, and I don't think it was just over getting 100 wins, his 100th win at Penn State.
Right.
I think if Penn State had lost that game, I think the criticism of James, unfairly or fairly, would have grown exponentially. I do think, I was asked this earlier today, and I'm still not sure. Would you consider this a successful season right now, even if they lose to Boise State? And I said, I would, but I know there are a lot of critics out there who wouldn't, because they're favored by double digits against Boise State.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's any question. If they beat Boise State and they're in the semifinal against Georgia or Notre Dame in the Orange Bowl, that's a successful season. I don't know how you can argue otherwise. So, but I think it was I think there were a lot of fans who wanted to see a home playoff game and wanted to see them win, and they got their wish Saturday, and I think that's important.
Yeah, I mean, it's always something that I find interesting as you're watching a team go through and clearing hurdles, is that when people are not enamored with somebody, they keep moving the bar instead of maybe looking at the whole thing. And I'm kind of sick of people moving the bar. Just like, look at it realistically.
I mean, I got 2 emails in the last hour here. James was on earlier on a Fiesta Bowl call, and I'm transcribing.
Right.
And both of them are critical of James. And I'm like, wait a minute. I mean, winning 12 games is the same as it was in 1994, 86, and 73. Okay, it wasn't. But it's still a pretty darn big accomplishment to win 12 games in a season. I don't care how you cut it.
Right.
I mean, but there are people out there. I don't know what it'll take for the criticism to stop. And it's a small, vocal minority. It's not the majority of the fan base.
No, look, they have their agenda. I understand that part.
Yeah. So, but I mean, you got to the playoff, which I think big. You had to get in the playoff, and you won at home against the number 10 team in the country. Whether you like their ranking or not, they were the number 10 team in the country. And now you got a shot to play Boise in the Fiesta Bowl and a shot to get to the semifinals. And again, like I said, if you get to the semifinals in this format and you lose to Notre Dame or Georgia, whatever, I mean, how do you consider that a failure? I just don't understand it.
Rich, there's a segment, and I'll label it 10%, 5 to 10%. Mm-hmm. You can tell me if I'm off base on the percentage. That don't understand how difficult winning is. Right? Also true. I mean, this is not an ESPN highlight show where it looks like it's easy to win. Right? It's a real 3.5 hour game. Winning's hard, and that's what makes, like, you talk about 12 wins. Winning's hard. To do that 12 times, you've done a lot of difficult things to get to 12 wins, because this is not the same team that took the field against West Virginia in terms of personnel.
No, absolutely not. And, you're right. You're 100% right. It's winning 12 games in this day and age. Wow. I mean, that's really impressive. And the other thing is, how good does that loss to Ohio State look today?
Yeah.
I mean, not a loss is good, but you know what I mean. Like,
Yeah.
Penn State had an opportunity to win the game. They didn't, but they had an opportunity to win the game.
Right.
Okay, and I know the fans are tired of close calls against Ohio State. I get that, but it tells you Penn State's pretty good, really good.
Yeah.
So, oh well.
I mean, again, you're at some point with again that 5 to 10%. I'll use my mother's old expression. She used a different word, but it's like shoving garbage against the tide. I mean, it's like it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
She may have used a different word, a little more colorful.
Yeah. I mean, I understand. Nobody wants to win more than James Franklin.
No.
Nobody wants to win the national championship more than James Franklin.
Yeah.
And to say, I understand the frustration. And yes, he doesn't have a great record against top 5 and top 10 teams. I mean, we know that. Okay. But this program, over the last, especially beginning with 2016, it's been really good.
Yeah.
Really good.
Yeah.
It just can't get over the hump. And as I brought up this morning to somebody who maybe isn't as old as you and I, Tom Landry was one of the great coaches in NFL history. Is still one of the great coaches in NFL history.
What?
I remember growing up.
Yep.
He can't win the big one.
Can't win the big one. I'll give you the other one. I'll give you the other one. Okay? And because Landry, I've always thought of same thing. Can't win the big game. Then he won the Super Bowl. Okay? You know who the other one was? John Madden. John Madden was told over and over again he could not win the big game. Now, I happen to sit right next to one of the problems he had, Jack Ham, because they couldn't get past the Steelers. Okay?
Yeah.
And they finally got past the Steelers when Franco and Blyer were both out and couldn't play the AFC Championship game. They both got hurt in the playoff game with, I think, the Colts or somebody like that. And they won.
Right.
They won the Super Bowl. At that point on, Madden was golden in his life after that moment when they beat the Vikings. But before that, John Madden was the guy that for 10 years could not win the big one. And see, it's things like that. It's those narratives that crop up. And if you have a semblance of history like Rich and I do, we know how narratives work out.
Right, and Madden is considered one of the great NFL coaches of all time.
Yep.
Yeah, it's not the greatest, but he's one of the greatest.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, and then you look at like a Dabo Swinney. Dabo Swinney heard that for a long time.
Oh, remember the old expression? They're Clemsoning. Right?
Yeah.
That was the old expression. They're Clemsoning. Then he won 2 national titles. Have you had any look at Ashton Genty this season at
Bits
all?
and pieces. Yeah, bits and pieces, but I know this. I voted for him for the Heisman Trophy.
Okay.
He was in my number 1 spot. And as James mentioned about an hour or so ago, his yards after contact are ridiculous. It's like 1,300 yards.
It's 1,800.
It's crazy.
It's 1,800.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. And his average per game was, I don't know how many more yards than the guy who's second. It's 60, 70 yards. I can't remember the lot. I didn't look at it recently. But he's going to be a handful. No doubt about it.
Hey, guess what? They're there for a reason.
Yeah.
Okay? They won their way in. They deserve to be there. Rich,
Absolutely.
to you and your family, and it's a great family, by the way. I've had the privilege of meeting many of them. Happy holidays, and really looking forward to seeing you out in Phoenix.
Sounds good, Steve. Merry Christmas to you and yours, and to Todd, and thanks again for having me on. Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure. Your perspective's invaluable to me. Thank you, Rich. The great Rich Scarcella. Reading Eagle. And this half hour has been brought to you by our good friends at Sunbury Motors, 4th Street in Sunbury, Sunbury Motors Kia, routes 11 and 15 in Hummel's Wharf, and online at sunburymotors.com. Ford, Kia, Hyundai, best in new inventory. I went with Ford this year. 2024 has been great to me because of that vehicle and that buying experience at Sunbury Motors. Full lot of pre-owned vehicles, all with the Sunbury Motors guarantee. And whether it's quick lane, inspections, routine, difficult. Their service department handles it all at Sunbury Motors, 4th Street in Sunbury. Sunbury Motors, Kia, routes 11 and 15 in Hummel's Wharf on News Radio 1070 WKOK. This half hour brought to you by Purdy Insurance, Market Street in Sunbury. Go to purdyinsurance.com. Auto, home, life, business, boat, motorcycle, RV. We have a multitude of insurance needs. We do. Indeed, we do. And because of that, you need somebody to really keep it organized, make sure you're fully insured, and also make sure they do everything they can to save you money. That's big. We work with the suit. He's cheap, and he's all about saving money. Usually it's not ours. All right. Purdy Insurance, Market Street in Sunbury. Go to purdyinsurance.com. We bring in the outstanding, the fabulous Neal Coolong. Sir, welcome.
As always, it's my great pleasure to be here. I hope you guys are doing well.
Happy holidays, by the way, to you and your great family.
You as well. You as well. I'm glad we could get one in to commemorate the season here.
Absolutely. And it's we knew that the Steelers, when they hit the stretch run, they would be a few more football version of minefields for them to navigate. And the possibility was there that it may be difficult to do. A, are we seeing evidence of that? And B, why?
I think you have a team that, I don't want to say overachieved. I mean, you play your schedule.
Yeah.
But let's be real. At the very least, in the game itself, within the fourth quarter, they won a couple that were pretty on the fence. I mean, they didn't necessarily have, a 60+% chance of winning. That Washington game, that looked like it was dead. The first Ravens game, the one they won, didn't look like they had a chance at that. They built up the equity that I figured that they were going to spend. I mean, I thought at the beginning of the year, I didn't think Philadelphia would be as good a team as they are. But then we saw them lose this week as well. So who knows week to week. Baltimore followed by Kansas City on a short week. Baltimore on the road, then Kansas City at home. I don't think it gets worse than that. I don't know if anybody had a worse two-game stretch in the NFL.
Yeah.
And the Steelers really don't win short week games anymore. They haven't in a while. I wouldn't feel all that optimistic about this one. If you look at it at a 10,000-foot level, for them to have what seems to be the yearly tradition of a Mike Tomlin December 3-game losing streak, this one was probably the most likely for it to have happened. Which is funny to me because last year when they had it, it was against three teams they should have beat.
Right.
Should have been a 3-game winning streak.
That's right.
So maybe they're paying the price and kind of, regressing to the mean here. But I think, when I look at it, 10-6 going into the final game of the season against Cincinnati isn't a bad spot for them to be. Also, I think it's instructive to point out that next man up, whatever cliche you want to use, when George Pickens is not on the field, they don't have anybody to replace George Pickens.
No.
It's not a schematic thing, which is really what next man up means.
Right.
You need to be ready to handle the assignment that you're given. There isn't anybody on their roster that's going to do what George Pickens can do. I don't know if you watched it at all, but T.J. Watt was not even close to 100%, not even close to 80% in that game. Very little impact against Baltimore. Deshaun Elliott out of nowhere is a Pro Bowl level safety. If you want to get on the Steelers for not having a Pro Bowl backup safety, then okay, but they don't have that, and their run defense is suffering tremendously with the losses that they have up front. And offensively, we've known how thin their receiving core was. Even when it's at 100%, it's one of the worst total units in the league. So it's important to look at it in the proper context. But at the end of the day, should we be evaluating this as a Super Bowl team? I don't think I ever really did. So to be honest, this isn't surprising. And I've all but already given them a loss against Kansas City. I don't think anybody would expect them to win that game. You put all those things together, they earned a playoff spot. They didn't back into it. It didn't come down to tiebreakers in the last weekend of the season. At the same time, though, they are beaten up pretty badly, and they need to get guys healthy if they're going to make anything of a competitive stand in the playoffs, which really would be, a major takeaway going into this offseason, which is not what we've seen over the last couple of years. I think they have a shot at it this year. At full strength, they can beat Baltimore in Baltimore. I think they can compete against the top teams. But, yeah, I mean, with this current run, I think they lost the division. That doesn't out surprise me, and I don't think that it ruins the season either.
Well, see, that's what I understand always saying next man up. I understand that because somebody has to play, and you don't want, in other words, you're trying to portray the confidence in whomever's going to play. So that part I understand. But there's a reason the other guy's starting. There is a reason why the other guy plays a ton of plays. Because they're better than the guy that's replacing him. It's simple as that. I mean, it's not that difficult to figure out.
Well, in this particular case, too, the gap between the starter and the backup is pretty significant. I mean, it's not close. And on top of that, if you want to illustrate it even more, I mean, you can't take T.J. Watt off the field, even when he's at probably 60%. But that means you've got a guy that's barely over half of what he normally is. And we're talking about a guy who's expected to put up Hall of Fame stats in every game. Watt wasn't a factor in that game at all. I think he had one pressure that I saw. Lamar Jackson was unchecked and unchallenged within the pocket. That was just passing. I don't think he had a great passing game. Running the ball, Derrick Henry probably had the easiest, 160 yards, whatever it was, that he's had in his career. They really didn't get after him up front. They lost the line of scrimmage pretty badly, and the Ravens are not known as a dominant offensive line individually. They played very well as a scheme. They knew how to attack Pittsburgh where they were weakest, which was in multiple spots. Their linebackers proved to really not be all that effective without the help and the cover up front. And it reminded me a lot of 3-4 seasons ago, I think it was, 2021 it might have been, where they gave up like 180 yards in 3 straight games on the ground, something like that, when they had injuries. That was back when they had something called Daniel Archibong starting for them because of injuries. That depth on the defensive line, the value of that later in a year is significant, and the Steelers lost a little bit of it. They've got to figure out a way to get it back. Larry Ogunjobi has missed some time. Watt is not 100% healthy, like I said. They have to find ways to patch that kind of thing up if they want to have a real chance at making a run late into January. Obviously, it's not. They don't have time to do that now, provided they can't get some guys healthy and get them back on the field and playing. I think they can come back to a pretty good level, but long term, they're going to have to find some realistic depth, which I think they've been building, because it's a lot better off than it was the last couple of years. But it's not quite there yet, and I think we saw that on the field on Saturday.
Look, I know it was the Chicago Bears, but you talk about depth. I mean, Detroit's depth on defense has been tested beyond words. They figured out a way to win that game, and I know it's the Bears. I understand that. And I have a good friend, by the way, who's a big Bears fan, but probably gets it more than anybody else. But they've got a 2-game advantage now in Philadelphia because they have the tiebreaker. Because they won, Philadelphia lost. I mean, in some ways, I think what Detroit's doing here down the stretch is really kind of amazing and tells you a lot about them, doesn't it?
You know what it reminds me of is the Green Bay Packers in 2010, their Super Bowl run.
Yeah.
They had similar challenges. It wasn't as bad. I don't know how many teams have put 22 guys on injured reserve and won a top seed heading into the playoffs, which is what Detroit's kind of on pace to do right now. The Packers lost 5 or 6 defensive starters, I think, at various points throughout the year. Going into the final stretch of the season, they had to basically overhaul their entire defense. And if you recall, that was the year they were transitioning out of a 4-3 under Dom Capers into a 3-4 defense. The genius behind what they did was really to use their schematic, their personnel weakness as a schematic strength. Because on one hand, you don't play the game in a vacuum. It's not always about. I mean, the individuals competing really have a one-on-one matchup against somebody. That's just football. But from a schematic standpoint, it's using different guys in different ways. And the Packers were forced to face that problem. They had to solve that problem. And the solution of it is something that other teams haven't seen them do. So in that, you have a tactical advantage over your opponent. And I think that's a lot of what Detroit is able to do right now. When you have, the talent of a coaching staff, it largely comes down to how well the players play, right? And that is you putting them in position to be successful. They're not always successful with that. It's not always because the coach screwed up. Some guys just lose sometimes. But what Detroit has, I think, is that chemistry where guys have a certain level of versatility, and they're willing to buy into what the coaches are telling them to do. And for me, one, this is a big part of why I think Aaron Glenn's going to be a head coach in the NFL sooner rather than later.
Yep.
But two, it shows the remarkable character of the team, and that's not something, in my opinion, that you attribute to any one person. That's a lot of people, and that's a lot of people probably giving the same credit to one another, and that's what makes Detroit so difficult to beat. That they're a team. Look, plain and simple, Dan Campbell screwed up pretty bad against Buffalo. That's a bad mistake. Yeah. We've seen Dan Campbell make really bad mistakes in games.
Yes.
They don't complain. They don't, kind of cry. I would, not to rub salt in the wound of your friend, but I think that's what you see a lot of the Chicago Bears doing.
Yeah.
Blame the coach as much as you want. You have a quarterback on that team that does whatever he wants to do, and it's creating problems. And it seems like there's animosity between the players and the coaching staff. They're not buying into what they're being told to do. But they face a challenge and they back away. Detroit is just mowing through it like it's nothing, like it's all a part of the plan. That's a remarkable team. That's a really difficult team to beat. The Packers ended up winning the Super Bowl. I think they were a 6th seed.
They were.
They beat Pittsburgh, and the Packers were favored in that game.
Yep.
That's how well they were playing. And defensively, what you really saw from them is they took the ball away. Detroit has had some rough defensive games for sure, but they find a way to get the job done, drive to drive. Whatever it is that needs to happen, they tend to make it happen, and that's why you got to look at them as a favorite in a stacked NFC. That's a really difficult conference. Whoever wins that is going to go through a lot just to get to the Super Bowl, let alone taking on whoever's coming from the AFC.
So with that, I will follow up because I'm going to go to your hometown team, a team that could be a wild card team with 13 wins, the Minnesota Vikings. What makes the Vikings a winning team this year, despite the fact that they had some offseason changes?
A couple things that I really enjoy about the Vikings. First off, Kevin O'Connell, I think, is the most underrated coach in the NFL.
Really
I
good.
said that this offseason.
Yep.
People don't understand what he did with Kirk Cousins and where Kirk Cousins was prior to his injury last year. He was legitimately playing at an MVP level. And to have Sam Darnold, King journeyman, King bust draft pick, come in and play at that same level. In other words, they didn't lose anything. It's just, KOC had that unit at a borderline playoff level last season, and they had plumbers and firemen playing quarterback for them. If you look and see the level of talent, Sean Mannion, the one guy, I don't remember his name, the kid from BYU, I think he was undrafted. They gave him a half to read. They gave him a half to play, and he was that bad.
Yeah.
Without Cousins, they fought to 8-9 wins, I think it was, something like that. A very competitive unit. They went out and they don't really have any draft assets to utilize this coming year. They put everything into free agency because they had to get up and get a quarterback. They got a highly rated quarterback, but had to get that first year with a veteran out of the way first. And where they're playing, they're in a rebuilding year. Kevin O'Connell, my opinion, is coach of the year. I don't think he'll win that, but for whatever it's worth, I think it's fair to say he's clearly one of the best coaches in the game. On top of that, the way that he proves it watch the first quarter of every Vikings game. You'll see a team that basically dominates its opponent on both sides of the ball. I don't think there is a team that comes out better prepared for their opponent than the Vikings each week. Now, if you really get into it, you talk to the top minds as far as the NFL game goes, the first quarter is largely scripted.
Right.
They kind of know what's coming, and it's us versus you. These are the things that we're going to do. We're going to base the rest of what we're going to do for the rest of the game on what happens within this first quarter. And teams have a very difficult time stopping the Vikings on their first drive, game in and game out. Defensively, they often get takeaways. They often get sacks. They jump out to a 7-0, 10-0, 10-3 lead often within the first quarter. They did it against the Lions in the game that they lost, which is another side here. Keep in mind, the Vikings 13 wins, and the Packers are 12.
Right.
But I'm willing to bet one of the three NFC North teams is going to the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
It's going to be one of them, just being one of the best divisions we've seen in recent memory. The Vikings, I think, are every bit as good as the Lions. They don't have kind of that feel-good story. They're not maybe as entertaining to watch as the prolific Lions offense is. But the Vikings are so good all around, you completely forget the fact that this team really kind of needed this year to turn around to get past Cousins' cap number, which, by the way, people that suggested Kirk Cousins should stay in Minnesota at $40 million a year, that worked out well. They're supposed to be for next year and beyond. That was their team. They weren't going to play McCarthy. This was the year that they were going to build, put a realistic quarterback option out there. And I don't know what to tell you. If you don't think that Sam Darnold is not a top 5 MVP candidate, you're crazy. Darnold has played that well throughout the year. It all comes down to what the Vikings have done internally. They've rebuilt a pretty broken ship for a while there, and their best years are still ahead of them. They get cap space next year. They don't have any draft picks. After that, they have cap space and draft picks. Imagine what they're going to be. If McCarthy is anywhere near where Darnold is, which may or may not happen, we don't know. You're looking at a team that's going to compete at a very high level over the next 3 years, and it's completely realistic to say the Vikings could be in the Super Bowl this year. The Vikings-Bills Super Bowl. That's what everybody wants, except me. I've got business interests with the Bills. I've got personal interests with the Vikings. It'd be a rough game for me personally, but it would be fun to see one of those two teams win.
No, again, the talent, Addison, Jefferson, Hawkinson, that they have. It's almost like a lot of people don't seem to know about the Vikings because they're not the Packers are darlings because they're from Green Bay. Detroit, great story because of last year. It seems like the Vikings are that team in the NFC that's flying under the radar, and there isn't a single team out there who wants to play them.
I agree completely, and throw in Philadelphia to that as well. Yeah. It's like the Vikings are the team. Keep in mind, you watched, it was just a brilliant football game. The Lions and Vikings, the first time they played in Minneapolis, that was a great game. Very well played on both sides. The Lions won on a last-second field goal, 27-24, I think it was, which I think is a pretty balanced final score between two really good teams. That's probably about what you would expect. There's no reason to think Minnesota can't beat Detroit. They've beaten Green Bay. Yep. They can beat Philadelphia, but you're exactly right. The other three teams are the ones that get far more of the national attention. Everything you hear about Minnesota is, oh my God, Sam Darnold is doing this. Look at the defensive side of the ball. Look at what they're getting from players that you've never heard of before. Andrew Van Ginkel, you didn't know who he was.
Nope.
Blake Cashman, you kind of maybe knew who he was.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned Hawkinson. You got to see Hawkinson play in college. I'm not sure I've ever enjoyed watching a college player more than I did watching Hawkinson play. It's just a phenomenal 3-down tight end. Yep. They get so much out of every guy that they have. They've lost to Neal Hunter and signed Grenard for less than what Hunter got. The front office has made excellent moves there, and these are moves that you didn't necessarily think would pay off as much as it has in year one. But at the end of the day, they are behind Detroit on a last-second field goal from against a Lions team that was in the NFC Championship game last year, and frankly should have won that game.
Right.
They learned a lot from that. They've been a great team over the last 2 years. The Vikings are the upstart, and they're right there with them. So I'm excited. I think the NFC is going to really be where the action is this year. I think they're probably, whoever it is that's coming out, I think they're the ones that are going to win the Super Bowl. Whoever gets to the Super Bowl from the NFC will have beaten two excellent teams, at least, in my opinion, in the divisional and the conference championship games. I think that can be Minnesota. It's certainly possible. They're right up there.
Well, I'll tell you, we always throw holiday blessings on this show. For more than a decade, you've been one of them. Thank you so much, sir.
Absolutely. The pleasure is all mine. Happy holidays, guys. Hope you enjoy it.
Neal Coolong. And half hour brought to you by Purdy Insurance on News Radio 1070 WKOK.